Hello, everyone. My name is Aviana Calderon, and for my domain analysis presentation, I chose to focus on seventh grade ratios and proportional relationships. I chose this portion of the standard because I have taught seventh grade for the past 8 years, and I have the most knowledge on the seventh grade standards and what is to be taught by the teacher and what is to be learned by the student. Previously, in sixth grade, students learned according to our textbook, Your Mathematics Standard Companion, what they mean and how to teach them. We have cluster A, which is understand ratio concepts and use ratio reasoning to solve problems. Under cluster A, we have 3 standards. Standards 1 would be 6 ratio and proportion 1, which is understand the concept of ratio and the use of ratio language to describe the relationship between two quantities. We have standard 2, which is 6 RP2, which is understand the concept of unit rate associated with ratio written in standard A:B. And then we have standard 3, which is use ratio and rate reasoning to solve real world and mathematical problems. Now moving on to seventh grade, which is the focus of my presentation. Under cluster A, we have standard 1, which is 7 RP1A, which is compute unit rates associated with fractions, including ratios of lengths, areas, and other quantities, measures, and like or different units. I have included the definition of unit rate, which is also includes rate, which is a rate is a ratio that compares two quantities with different units. And a unit rate is a rate that has 1 as a denominator. So unit rate is a simplified version of a rate. So for example, if we have 24 pencils cost $1.20, how much will 6 pencils cost? So the first thing we have to do is we have to find that unit rate using division, which is a main focus with unit rate, is knowing that to go from a rate to a unit rate, we must divide to get that single unit. And the question asks, how much will 6 pencils cost? And then we would take that unit rate and we would multiply it by 6 for this scenario. And in other scenarios, we would multiply it by whatever number the question is asking us to multiply it by. So for standard 1, we have teacher versus student, what the teacher does and what the student does. The teacher ensures that we explore unit rates with ratios of fractions and compare them to unit rates with whole numbers in grade 6. We set up error analysis scenarios where students can identify errors in computing unit rates. And 3, we provide opportunities for students to compute the unit rates in real world problems. For standard 1, what the student does. We discover that the structure of computing unit rates with whole numbers is the same concept as unit rates with ratios and fractions. What the student does, number 2, is compute unit rates in real-world problems that involve complex fractions. And for 3, in writing, explain the errors that can be made when computing unit rates with complex fractions and unlike units. Standard 1, common misconceptions. Students may not be fluent in fraction division, and the format of a complex fractions confuses them when they are used to seeing fraction division written horizontally. So for instance, if fractions are not written with that division sign, students sometimes don't know that we are supposed to be dividing fractions. So for instance, if the division of fractions is written with one fraction and then the division bar and then another fraction on the bottom, sometimes they don't read that as division because it does not have a division sign. Cluster A, standard 2. It says recognize 7RPA2. Recognize and represent proportional relationships between quantities. And this standard is broken down into 4 parts, so it is a very complex standard. We have A, decide whether two quantities are in a proportional relationship. Example, by testing for equivalent ratios in a table or graphing on a coordinate plane and observing whether the graph is a straight line through the origin. Because in order for a line to be proportional, it must first be straight and it must second go through the origin at 0.00. B, identify the constant of proportionality, which is the unit rate, in tables, graphs, equations, diagrams, and verbal descriptions of proportional relationships. C, Represent proportional relationships by equations. For example, if the total cost is T is proportional to the number N of items purchased at a constant price of P, the relationship between the total cost and the number of items can be written and expressed as T equals PM. And D, explain what point XY on the graph of a proportional relationship means in the terms of the situation with special attention to the point 0, 0, which is the origin, and 1, comma R, which is the unit rate. So for standard 2, we have our teacher's role. I did do a summary of parts A through D because it is such a complex standard. So a summary of the teacher's role for standard 2 would be explore proportional reasoning scenarios with students to be sure they understand the meaning of proportional relationships in context before using the tables or graphs. 2, graph ratios on a coordinate plane to test if the situation is proportional or not. 3, provide students with real-world proportional relationships expressed in a verbal description, graph, table, and equation. 4, focus on point 0, 0, and 1R, the origin and the unit rate, respectively. 5, use points that are not whole numbers and points where students need to estimate coordinates. 6, have students write equations to model proportional relationships. Standard 2, the student's role. And again, this is a summary since we are looking at 4 different parts. So this is a summary of parts A through D. So we model proportional relationships by resting tables and graphs to determine if they are proportional. We determine the unit rate from equations, graphs, tables, diagrams, and verbal descriptions of proportional relationships. 3, we model proportional relationships presented as tables, verbal descriptions, and graphs in equation form. And 4, explain the meaning of a point of a graph in context to the situation. Now we have cluster A, which is standard 3, and that's 7RPA3. Use proportional relationships to solve multi-step ratio and percent problems. Examples include sales tax, gratuities, and discount. I have included on this slide 2 ways that students can solve calculating sales tax and tips. We have method 1 and we have method 2. So the first method involves conversions, which is converting a percent to a decimal, multiplying and adding. And the second one includes adding the percent to 100, then converting to a percent and a decimal, and then multiplying the price and the discount. There also is a third method that you can do, which is setting up those proportions and then solving. So since there are multiple ways to do this standard, it is important for the teacher to present those 3 ways to the students and have the students decide which method works best for them, because all students learn differently. So it is important that we sometimes give them a choice when there is multiple methods that we can use to solve one standard, and we get the same answer either way, depending on the method that we use. So for standard 3, we have our teacher versus student roles. What the teacher will do is we will focus on vocabulary using word walls and graphic organizers. So some of those vocabulary words will include the sales tax, percent, discount, gratuities, we have commission, there's percent increase, percent decrease, markup, markdown. There's a lot of different vocabulary, and they all mean something different. So it is important to focus on vocabulary for this standard. We also use cross multiplication to solve problems involving proportional relationships. And we begin with single step problems and move to multi-step problems. So for example, if the problem asks for sales tax and discount, it is important that we teach sales tax as one lesson, discount as another lesson, and then move on to doing sales tax and discount in the same lesson. What the students will do, they will explore the use of vocabulary words in this standard by finding examples and explain how they are used. We solve problems involving proportions using cross multiplication. And lastly, solve problems involving percent error and percent increase and decrease. So again, focusing on that vocabulary so that students know what percent increase is, what percent decrease is, what is percent error, and also what is cross multiplication. Student 3, common misconceptions. Students may have misconceptions about the vocabulary used in the media, such as sale, discount, and tax. So for individuals struggling with particular words, use graphic organizers such as a Frayer model. So the Frayer model allows the students to write the term in the middle, give the definition, give characteristics, give examples of what the term means, and then give examples of what the term doesn't mean. So it's breaking down the word into different categories in order for students to better understand that vocabulary term. And the cognitive task that I chose is students will do tax and tip in the same lesson. So this is a multi-step percent problem. So the learning goal is students will calculate the sales tax and tip, and the standard is use proportional relationships to solve multi-step ratio and percent problems. Examples include sales tax, gratuities, and discount. I chose this task because it is a more demanding task because it does have multiple steps. Students not only have to find the sales tax, then they also have to find the tip, which is gratuity that goes along with this problem. And then they have to answer several different questions. So one of the questions says, how much should you leave for the waiter? So that's taking out the gratuity. And then how much will the total be, including tax and tip? So that is an overall answer after you have performed those multi-steps. Since this is a multi-step problem, students sometimes struggle with doing 2 tasks in one. And that is the end of my presentation. I hope you all enjoyed. Thank you so much.